so much for joining the panel today. So I am, let's go this way. So I'm Nari Tarosian. I'm a second-year cardiology fellow at USC, and I'll be co-hosting the panel alongside Ned, who some of you have met and you'll meet shortly. He's a fellow from UC Irvine. We are really grateful to all of our panelists for joining. I think especially this time of year, fellows are thinking forward to either subspecialty fellowship or applying to their first job as an attending. So we're very grateful for all of you being here to share your insights, and we look forward to learning from your experiences. I think we can get started by having the panelists introduce themselves. If you can just mention your background and what practice you're in now, that would be great. And then for people joining, if you can include in your name, if you could just rename yourself and include whether you're a panelist or if you're a fellow, what year fellow you are and what institution you're from, that would be wonderful. So I'll just call on the panelists in the order that I see them on my screen. Or actually, I'll start with Dr. Gogia because he's right next to me. So.
Hi, I'm Sean Gogia. I am in my first year of an attending life here at USC, and I work at the county hospital with Nari. I have done a little bit of training in interventional cardiology and then structural cardiology, and so that's kind of my focus. I do some clinic time, mostly procedures, and some time on service.
Thank you. And then Dr. Ungar, would you like to go next?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting me, Ned. I'm Leo Unger. I'm 7th year UCI fellow. I was a UCI general fellow where I was a chief, and then I did EP at Kaiser Sunset, and now I'm in private practice with Foothill Cardiology in Pasadena, mostly at Huntington Hospital.
Great, thank you. Dr. Shaw, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nari, for having me. My name is Sean Shaw. I am also in my first year of attending life at Kaiser Harbor City, or Kaiser South Bay, as it's also known. So I did all of my training. I'm originally from the Bay Area, but I did all my training over at USC at the county as well. So from med school, residency to fellowship, and then just started here in August of last year.
Great, thank you. And then next we'll do Dr. Schachter, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing anyone's last names incorrectly.
You got it right, thank you. So I'm Jessica Schachter. I'm originally from the East Coast, New York. I did some training out there and I've kind of bounced around and ended up at UCI for cardiology fellowship. I graduated just last year, so also in my first year of attending life, and I also do private practice, general cardiology, general like invasive cardiology, so have the option to do some procedures here in Orange County at a group called California Heart.
Perfect, thank you. Dr. Rodriguez, you'll be next.
Okay.
Oh, I think you. Perfect. We hear you now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Cristina Rodriguez, originally from Puerto Rico. Did my cardiology training at Strips Clinic, then did a subspecialty training at Stanford for advanced cardiac imaging, where I got to train with Dr. Salerno, super great guy, cardiac MRI, CT, some structural TE, and this is my first year as an attending. I'm at Long Beach Memorial Hospital. I consider my practice kind of hybrid because I do work with fellows, so yeah, doing mitral clips, triclips, reading cardiac MRI, CTs, and doing general cardiology.
Thank you so much. Dr. Yuan, great to see you. Can you introduce yourself?
Hey, Nari. Yeah, there's a lot of familiar faces on this call. It's good to see all these folks. I'm Neil. I'm about, I guess, 3 years out of fellowship now. I did my cardiology fellowship at Cedars and was at UCSF for med school and residency. And I am back at UCSF, mainly based out of the San Francisco VA as a general cardiologist. And I do a mix of a lot of different things, but my clinical responsibilities include general cardiology clinic, and a lot of echo time. I do all of our structural echo procedures, and I run our stress lab and cardiac rehab programs. And then I also do some education and just a little bit of research on the side. So kind of a mix of everything.
Awesome, thank you. And then Dr., is it Najorje?
Hi, it's Jiroge, I think so. And I apologize if there's background noise. I found a place that was initially quiet, but now they just like amped up some music. So if you hear that, I promise I'm not clubbing. But I'm Joyce. I originally also from the East Coast. I'm from New Jersey. And I've trained in the Midwest and then eventually UCSF for Gen Cards and Stanford for heart failure advanced training. And now I just started again, just 1 year into attending at Stanford. So purely academic, predominantly clinical, 80% clinical, 20% research.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. I will pass it on to Ned, and he'll get us started with a little bit more of the nitty-gritty details.
Perfect. So we have a series of kind of general questions we wanted to run by all the panelists, and we can we'll go one by one and just kind of pose some general questions for you about that we might find helpful as people kind of looking for jobs here pretty soon. For the audience, if you guys would like to ask any specific questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and we will make sure that those get asked as well. So I think some of you have kind of started to touch on this already, but if you could speak to this first point, we'll ask you, what is the model of your current practice? What do you think are important considerations when you're looking for your first job after fellowship? And what do you like or dislike about your current practice model that you think fellows should know about kind of considering going into that? First on my screen, maybe Dr. Ungar, if you want to take a stab at that. Oh, Dr. Ungar, I think you're muted.
My bad, dude. Can you repeat all the parts of that multi-part question?
Yeah. So basically, what's the current practice model like in your current job? What do you think are important considerations about that practice model, or in general, considering different practice models when you're looking for your first job?
Totally. So I'm in private practice. The way our schedule is set up is that we have 4 half days of clinic per week. I often do a 5th also because it's really busy, and the rest of the time is hospital time. And what that entails depends on your subspecialty. So for me as EP, it's procedural time. So it's, 2.5 full days of procedural time per week. Important considerations when considering different practice models and what you're looking at for your first job. So, I'm sure the other panelists can talk a lot about private practice versus academics versus sort of privademic, along with, I think, Dr. Rodriguez, who's at Long Beach Memorial. I always liked that sort of privademic environment. I like teaching, so there are residents here I can teach. I like some research. I really like clinical trials. I was at Stanford too for residency and med school, and I worked with some of the clinical trialists there, and I really like that. So in private practice CP, there's a lot of room for that, especially when it comes to collaboration with industry to do trials for new stuff, and we do a lot of that here. I didn't, need to be writing R01s or writing a lot of papers, looking at databases for this and that. So it had, a lot of the content of the work that I wanted. And then something that's huge is mentorship. My group has 3 other EPs, which is phenomenal for a private group. It's the biggest private group in the area, except maybe one on the west side. And the senior EP is a big clinical trialist. We did a lot of the CRT trials, a lot of the ICD trials, currently doing dual chamber leadless trials. So I think, you know, the sort of practice model, the amount of EP that I would be doing because it was a big group, the opportunity to do the kind of research I liked, not having to do the kind of research that, you know, is really important, but not as much for me. And then the mentorship all made this a really good opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Angar. You know, I think in the interest of time, do you think we should maybe pose questions and then we just open the floor for anybody that wants to jump in and speak to that point?
Yeah, sorry, multi-part question. Didn't
No,
mean to
yeah,
go too long.
that was a perfect answer. So I think like what we're hearing is deciding if you want to work in like a setting where you want to teach fellows, if you want to do research and how much, and then like how much that practice model allows you to do or spend certain amounts of time doing, whether that's procedures or clinic or inpatient consults or things like that. A kind of a combination of all those things, as well as the mentorship. Is there mentorship in the group you're joining? Is that correct? Those are the kind of the four big things. Perfect.
Nailed it.
Would anybody else like to comment on this first question? And Allison reposted it in the chat for your reference.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that piece about mentorship, because I think no matter where you go and what you do, being a first-year attending is going to be hard, and you're going to feel like you need a little bit of help here and there. And so part of the reason I picked my job is because I had someone who could be my mentor and someone that I trusted and is clinically very good and technically very good at procedures. And so that for me was the biggest thing, and that kind of outweighed like almost everything else. And I'm really grateful that I have that, because the people you work with end up being a big part of your day, especially in an academic center. And so that to me was a major selling point for this job, and a major point for me taking this job over other jobs. And so if you have the ability to work with people that you know you're going to like and gel with, I think that actually kind of should outweigh a little bit of other considerations, financial or geographic even, just because you spend so much time at work, and especially in the early years of being an attending, I think it's helpful to have that.
Yeah, I'm gonna add, just for cardiac imaging, I think this is an extra consideration that people don't think about when they're considering cardiac imaging is, you know, who runs the show in terms of, is it radiology, is it cardiology? That'll kind of dictate the liberties that you'll have in your job of reading or collaborating, and having a good group in that sense is essential, because if you did this extra specialty to sort of focus on that, you know, you should be practicing to your best capacity, and knowing who you're involved with, and who is the main driver of this, and how they permit you to interpret and manage your skill is essential for imaging.
I just like to add one thing real quick too. I think, you know, as you guys are kind of going through this for the second year, third year, I think one of the important things that I would recommend is not get bogged down too much with the titles of academic, private, institution like Kaiser. Honestly, within every single one of those fields, you will find the full spectrum of job opportunities. So I think a more important thing as you're going through this, and it's something that no one has at least told me, and there's really no class on it, is to figure out within the realm of cardiology, what do you truly enjoy? What can you see yourself doing 100% of the time? And what can you not see yourself doing 100% of the time? For me, I knew I could not do clinic all day, every day, 100% of my life. I didn't come from a program that had a strong outpatient focus. And I knew kind of upfront that's not what I wanted. I knew that I wanted to have some degree of procedures. That was important to me, whether it was just to use cardioversions or having the opportunity to be invasive, non-interventional. And, you know, that to me was kind of a hard cutoff, as opposed to looking at jobs of academics or not. I think it was more looking at all these different groups and saying which group will allow me to do allow me to have my hard cutoffs, which groups are willing to work with me on the things that I want, but I'm okay giving up on right now, and kind of what environment really am I looking for? Because at the end of the day, the opportunities are pretty much endless across the board, whether it's private, academic, private, you know, institution like Kaiser. I think no matter where you're at, you can find something that will fit you. So the more important thing is to figure out what what you want out of your job and go out and find those opportunities, because they definitely exist. And like I said, it's a very wide spectrum of what everyone's different practice models are like.
Thank you both. That's really great advice. So kind of focusing on the skills that you want to use, the way you want to practice cardiology, and focusing on that rather than the practice model, whether that's like academics, hybrid, or private practice. Anybody else want to comment on it? Does anybody else feel like really strongly about their practice model? They really love this practice model and they chose this specific practice model over another because of something specific, that if they were torn between two different jobs that were different practice settings that had very similar allowances of time towards doing one thing or over the other, whether that's procedures or echoes or clinic, and you chose one over the other in terms of practice model, does anyone feel strongly about that or would advocate for one over the other based on your experience?
Yeah, I'll say that, I struggled actually between staying at UCI because I loved the faculty, the staff, and the environment so much. I really love the teaching model, the workrooms, the collegiality, and I pretty much resigned myself to really not interviewing anywhere else until I interviewed at a few private practice settings. And, I'll echo what's already been said, but really understanding kind of internally taking a look at what do you actually want to do? And I realized, I do want to do procedures. I do want to do a lot of hospital-based work. And, I didn't interview at a lot of academic settings, so I can really only speak to UCI. But one of the things that was sort of holding me back from going with it is that it really was, great call schedule. And again, great environment, but a lot of clinic. And I wouldn't be doing procedures there, just TEEs. And it would be kind of on your echo weeks, which is not very frequent. And, especially with the group I ended up signing with, you really have to, it's like what they say for the match for anything. You got to go with your gut. And for me, the group themselves are just such amazing personalities, really great kind of mentorship vibe, but we're very honest about, this is the schedule we assign to you, but if you want to do caths, you do caths. If you don't, you don't. If you want to do pacers, you can do pacers. If you want to do structural echo, we'll find a spot for you. Anesthesia does it, but sure, why don't you join our Watchman cases, and we're going to start mitra clips. And really having that freedom to kind of build my practice the way I want. If you want to do something niche, one of our partners who joined around the same time as me is now trying to get into the more cardio oncology space. And having a niche like that is typically thought of as in academics. And it's almost like you have to choose something like that in academics to find your place. But private practice, I was, surprised that it's, you kind of hear that it's a little bit more freedom, but it really is like in the right group, they'll really let you design it how you want it to be. And I am really happy I ended up making my decision to go with this group in particular, not necessarily just because it's private practice, but I've really had that freedom to kind of build my practice, and I can still keep tweaking it along the way. But I think just having that honest kind of conversation with yourself, what do I actually want in my practice? And then interviewing at a myriad of different types of practices, because I think you'll be shocked with where you end up deciding really fits for you.
Thank you, Dr. Schachter. That's great input. Nari, do you have any questions you want to go to? Or actually, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, sort of going along those lines in terms of how you approached applying for the jobs, even finding out about the job openings. What resources did you use? Was it word of mouth or job postings? And then also, what did the timeline look like for you? And if you were given a certain offer, how did you navigate the path in terms of waiting to hear from other institutions you had applied to, because I know that can be a little bit tricky in terms of just the timeline of it all.
I can start with this. Sorry, I cut out earlier. I just wanted to, I had a comment on the last question, but I cut out for a second. But for the last question, I would say, I think it's very true that you can find whatever you're looking for in a lot of different places in terms of your mix of you know, how much clinical versus whether you want to do admin versus maybe even some teaching or research. I will say though that the starting arrangements are a little different at the different types of places, right? So, you know, for instance, if you take an academic job, often they may give you a portion of time that is dedicated for you to do education, research, admin, and then less clinical time up front. And that's because, you know, as an institution, they cater towards those priorities. Whereas, you know, if you're at a private practice group or, you know, a Kaiser, that sort of situation, I think you start from the other direction, which is they're hiring you because they want you to, you know, generally generate clinical revenue for the group or for the practice. So you start with that, and then you've got to buy down probably other time to work the other direction. So, you know, I think it is, and this goes back to what other people were saying, is that you really just need to figure out like what it is at the end of the day that you enjoy doing. I think, you know, we're trained through all of these steps and hoops that we've got to jump through to get to the next step in training to essentially, well, most of these programs are very academic, right? So we're used to being like, oh yes, I want to do research, and yes, I want to do teaching. But like, this is the first time where you're like, actually, I can really decide for myself, what of this do I really want to dedicate my time to? And that's really important, and something that you should do some introspection on. In terms of finding jobs, I think this is also interesting because, you know, throughout training, we have such a structured way of getting to the next step, right? Like there's always an application, you get letters, you interview, and then you like match, and like you couldn't have a more kind of structured way of getting to the next level. But when it comes to jobs, it's kind of interesting because it's in a lot of ways just like everyone else. Like it's kind of like who you know and like what connections you have, and it's a lot more free form, which can be a little jarring at first. But I basically encourage everyone to kind of like reach out to people that they know at your program or at other programs. And oftentimes it's about just asking around in terms of who has openings that are available. I mean, I think there are some places that will post openings. Certain hospital systems, like Kaiser, for example, they have like a more formalized recruiting process with their openings. But then a lot of places is kind of word of mouth, and you talk to people at the different places and ask around and see if they have jobs. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I can give like a little bit of input. I felt like I wasn't necessarily going to be incredibly helpful on this panel because I didn't interview anywhere. I felt very strongly that I wanted to be in North Bay, in like the Bay Area for being close to my partner. And if you guys are aware, there are like no jobs in heart failure anywhere, let alone out here. So I essentially I didn't plead, but I was lucky because 2 people retired at Stanford and I was able to stay on faculty. It's incredibly stressful, even when your home institution says, yes, you can stay, because nothing is finalized until you have your contract, just so you know. So I was put in this predicament, which I think is relatively common, where I was relatively sure that I would be able to stay at Stanford, but again, you never know. But I didn't want to reach out and inquire and ask for someone to make a job for me. I just felt bad doing that. I didn't want to burn bridges. I didn't want people to put in work to make a job for me and then for me to come back and say, oh, you know what, never mind, I'm actually staying at Stanford. I've heard a lot of people say that everyone does it, it's okay, you're not going to burn bridges. It just didn't sit great with me. So I can't say that's right or wrong. I have no insight on that. But I did look at the ACC website. I looked at things that were essentially already posted. So ACC, HFSA, for me for heart failure, HFSA, I'm sure AHA as well. They have forums where people will post about job openings. And that's a reasonable place if you're in a similar predicament to me. But otherwise, by far, everyone has said, you know, reach out to your previous program directors, reach out to your previous connections. And it's really not that big of a deal. They do this all the time. If there's an opening available, they'll make it happen. If you're trying to stay in California, I'm not quite sure how it is in Southern California, but it's really limited up here. You know, you may wind up if it's really important to you, you may wind up like altering what your career preferences are. And I only bring that up because I'm starting to learn a lot of people became, big names in whatever subspecialty or whatever focus they are because life led them that way. And we're all figuring things out. Like as a first year attending, I'm still figuring out my identity and I'm still trying to make that more concrete. And that's also okay. So my insight is very limited in terms of the job searching. Other than that, it is very hard. Starting early is probably better, especially if you have demographic or geographic restrictions. But where you end up is good if you're looking at the right things that everyone has already mentioned, you're gonna be fine wherever you wind up. And that's the common path that other people have experienced so far.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it seems that regional considerations, especially for subspecialists within our field, are important to be aware of, both as a general fellow and when you're wrapping up your subspecialty year. At this point, I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll continue with some of the questions that Ned and I came up with.
Hey, just one comment to that kind of second part of how when you start getting offers, like how do you manage that? I think that is a very overwhelming part of this process. Everybody's different, so you manage like however you would want to, like if you just want to take one offer and go from there. But I ended up getting like 5 or 6, I think, at a certain point. And I think the best policy that I found is just be open and communicative. Like, hey, I just got this offer. And then, they started rolling in once somebody had given me my first offer. So at some point, and it was, I went to Atlanta, I went to Florida, so I went to a couple places. It wasn't just restricted to California, so that was interesting in itself. But yeah, at the end, I was just like, once everybody knew that I was getting my offers, everybody kind of like got in the wagon, and it was really collegial and fine. There were no hardships once I made my decision. I took some of my time too. Like I was not, so many considerations. I think I responded within a week or 2 or something like that. And I was communicative during that time. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about it. And all of the other places knew that other places were considering me. So I think I was very honest. And that worked for me. Not hiding anything, being very upfront. And I didn't feel like I burned bridges with the people that I interviewed. They were like, hey, whatever happens, this is your first job. If you ever would want to reach out again, we're happy to have you again at interview, and we already know you. You just kind of make these connections along the way that become important in terms of your career, I feel. So it was a great opportunity, and I think that's a good way to manage it, just be honest and forward.
So one more thing, this is probably specific to EP, but a lot of jobs come through device reps. So the reps go to all the different hospitals, they know all the different EPs, they know which groups are hiring. They also see all the fellows, so they see everybody's skills. And they're not, they'll communicate honestly about all of those things with, both the fellows who are looking and also the people who are hiring. So that's how I got my offers was through the reps who know everyone in LA. Again, I suspect that's specific to EP, but if there are any fellows out there who are doing EP, it's good to know because that's not obvious necessarily.
I'll just add on to that. Sonographers also have their own like mafia system within Southern California. They all know each other. They all work at the same place. They all work with all the different groups. So it's another really good resource to tap into to see, not just to hear about opportunities, but also to hear about the culture of all the different places that they work at and all the other groups that they work with. So next time you're doing a TE with somebody you're reading echoes, just ask them where else do you work at any other institutions? Do you have any other week? What do you think about them? Because you'll learn a lot about group culture that way as well.
And obviously be nice to them, because that matters too.
That is all excellent advice. Our current interventional fellow got his job because of a rep also. So I think that's very applicable. And sonographers as well. I've seen sonographers rotating at other hospitals around here that I didn't know that they worked at. And, the community is very small. Be very kind and supportive to everybody, and it will pay you dividends, I think. That's really great advice. Does anybody have, and to our panelists, all of you guys are giving us such a gold advice right now. If you don't have an opportunity to speak or on something you'd like to, please feel free to throw comments in the chat. This is really, really great advice from everybody. Thank you guys so very much. I wanted to touch on it. Nari, do you want to ask any of the other questions we have? There's a question that I wanted to ask to kind of piggyback off of Dr. Naroge's point that she had made, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong.
Ned, I have a question from the chat.
Let's do it.
I'm sorry, I'm also somewhere loud, but how much time in advance to the desired start date should we reasonably start looking for jobs? Could you hear me?
Yep, I heard you. Go ahead. If anybody wants to tackle that.
I mean, you can probably start looking as early as beginning of your third year, truthfully, and just at least start getting suggestions. One of our fellows had already, I think, Jen, Ned, correct me if I'm wrong, I think she had signed with UCI as early as a few months into third year, or at least had already started interviews, especially if you think that, I guess if you're looking for something very specific, and maybe, Dr. Rodriguez can speak to this, especially with the imaging or heart failure. Some of those jobs are less, to come by. But, for myself, I think I interviewed probably later into the third year, interviewed at a couple places within a month and a half and found my job. So you don't have to start very early, but I think if you know what you want, what you're looking for, you're maybe wanting to look in a few different states, it really doesn't hurt to start earlier. But I don't think there's maybe an exact time, but maybe again, the more specialized positions, it's probably better to start early just to give yourself opportunities, I think.
Yeah, I think
I'll just piggyback.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I'll just piggyback off that quickly. Yeah, I started with a preliminary conversation in August or September. And actually at that time, they told me we're going to speak to you because you have a good reputation, but I'll be honest, we're going to hire someone before July. So we're not going to really think about hiring you. And then obviously it just worked out. So I would start early with at least preliminary conversations. I think I ended up signing in February. My situation maybe is slightly different because I was a structural procedural person, but I think even for general cardiologists, just getting your name out there and meeting with people early just to gauge your interest in their job and gauge their interest in you can be helpful. And again, sometimes they'll tell you the timeline's not going to work out, but things fall through or whatever, and things end up working out. So it's a good, like she said, good to be early.
I was just going to say that I think it was after my boards, during my subspecialty training, I just started that was my checklist. Once I finish this, I'm going to start looking for jobs. And so that's kind of the goals that I set for myself. And even before that, I had started texting people and sort of getting the lay of the land. But yeah, in subspecialty training, depending on where you want to end up, it's good to kind of have that earlier on. And also I got a few opportunities by going to conferences and talking to people and being part of AMA and AHA and all that stuff. And people were like, "Oh, you're looking for jobs? I've got somebody," and they would put me in contact with them. And I would say, "Yeah, I'm looking for an imaging job, as a general cardiologist." And so they were like, "Yeah, we're looking for that exactly." So it was really nice to, in these conferences and these environments, to get acquainted with people and network that way.
One question along those lines. We had a session earlier in the year with Dr. Cotton about a negotiation, sort of contract negotiations, and he talked about all the different forms that can take, not just salary, but also what your job looks like, and different techniques. Just wondering, a lot of you that have gone through this really recently, were there certain techniques or things that you did that worked well for you in terms of any form of negotiation, whether it was like the way that your time was split or how much non-clinical time or salary or clinical requirements, sort of when you did that, how you did that, and kind of how that worked in the different settings.
I can
So
start off. Oh, I was gonna say, mine's gonna be really quick because I can say I joined somewhere where there really was no negotiating with my contract. It kind of was a very bare bones. This is what it is. This is the number. The only thing I had ability to change was my start date, which they were very flexible with, and I think that can be kind of group specific. But the only thing I wanted to add to that was saying, in anticipation of before you get to the negotiating stage, I think it's important to ask those questions during the interviews and not be afraid. Because when I interviewed at some private groups and some academic places, I think one of the big, red flags for me was asking, how much service time am I going to get? Will I be responsible for reading nukes? What about CTs? What is the policy here? How much within one clinic day? Like, where are my patients? Like, I think getting those specifics kind of down and seeing how groups interact. Is it something that's kind of set in stone? Are they being kind of vague about it? Is it, oh, like we'll figure it out as it goes along? I think that informed me a lot up front about kind of where the group was at and where I would be utilized and how I would be utilized. And so I think just it's important to ask those questions throughout the interview process so that when you get to a stage of negotiating, you kind of know where you're at. And it might inform your decision up front of whether or not the group is a right fit for you.
I will say that I think in general, because we are kind of like first-time job seekers, we tend to under-negotiate for our job positions relative to other people in other jobs who have done this multiple times. So I'd encourage people to be a little more aggressive than maybe you feel comfortable initially in terms of negotiating your job. One thing that's really important is obviously if you have multiple offers, then that's helpful because you can leverage one when discussing with another job potential. So I think we talked about earlier that once you get an offer, I think it's important to tell other places you're interested in, because it can help speed along the process and they can maybe get you an offer sooner. And I think sometimes there are things like the base salary that are not negotiable. Like at Kaiser or like at a place like the VA, like those things are pretty set. But there's always like other ways to negotiate different things, including like if you're just strictly speaking monetarily, there are often like sign-on bonuses, like relocation bonuses that sometimes are offered. And then, exactly like in terms of the split of what your time looks like. And I agree that's really important to just nail down very specifically, like what am I going to be responsible for? What does like my week to week look like? And making sure that that fits within what you want. And maybe you can also negotiate for like support in terms of other people that will help you, like admin staff or like your office space, or like there are lots of different things that you can think about when you're thinking of what your ideal job might look like.
I think one comment for me from the contract standpoint, imagers, we don't make a lot of RVUs based on CT and just reading MRIs. So it is very important to have good negotiation with knowing that base salary, a good base salary, so you can kind of I think that's pivotal because you don't want to rely on just RVUs for your job. I think you have to have other hats, and I think they have to take that into consideration if they're hiring an imager. So that's something I don't think I ever got taught, but it's kind of important. There's also RVU bonuses that you can negotiate in your contract if you are a lower earning RVU kind of subspecialty. Then lowering the amount of minimum RVUs that you have to make per year might be good for your negotiation, I would say. So those are the things that I would suggest.
So I also want to add that there are some people I know who will get lawyers to look over contracts. And I think that depends on if you're if you're getting an offer from a place that has a pretty like boilerplate kind of contract, like the VA or like Kaiser, then maybe it's not as important. But if you're signing on with a private group, sometimes there are a lot of parts of a contract that might be good for someone else to look over. And you can also talk with other people that who may be at that place and kind of understand what their starting contract looked like and what they negotiated.
Thank you all. That was all really, really great information. I kind of just one thing I wanted to touch on really quickly, and I'll just ask this straight up. Did anybody find recruiters to be helpful? Like if you are a subspecialist doing something very specific and you are geographically limited, are recruiters helpful, or do they tend to be more kind of generic and focused on filling their own jobs in other parts of the country or anything like that? Did anyone go through recruiters or approach any recruiters to try to find a job in a specific region?
I got in touch with recruiters by email because they emailed me, and I would occasionally see a job that I thought might be interesting. So I would sort of send my CV and then ended up talking to one of the jobs. I think the value in recruiters is that they can fill the jobs for the hospital. But I think if you want to be in a specific region, and like people have said before, you talk to a device rep or a drug rep or someone who's in that area and region, they'll know every job that's available and open. And so I think in very rare circumstances, recruiters probably are helpful, but for the most part, if it's a job in a big city or somewhere out that you want to live, you can find other ways to learn about those jobs and find out more intimate details about the job than the recruiter will be able to give you.
Thank you. Any other, I think Dr. Naroge, who has left, had touched on specifically, the challenges of looking for jobs if you're a subspecialist in a specific region. I know for me, I'm in Southern California and, trying to stay down here. Would anybody else have anything to add in terms of tips or things to think about? I think a lot of stuff has been brought up that's been really helpful, but for people looking to stay in a specific region, other than kind of using your mentors, your previous program and reps, any other thoughts on special considerations for people trying to stay in a specific area?
I would just say in terms of specific, I was kind of the same thing where we wanted to stay in Southern California, specifically LA, and kind of the furthest we wanted to go was kind of South Bay versus maybe Orange County. As you're going through it, you just have to stay on top of it because jobs it is a constantly changing kind of like a wheel as job opportunities come up. So just it was really easy to get burned out and kind of frustrated as you're going through the process. Plus it's kind of like step one boards time again, where you're hearing about what everybody else is getting and what they're doing and how many interviews they're getting. And you're like, why is no one calling me back? It can be frustrating. So I think one big thing is just tune out the noise. What other people do really has no bearing on you. It doesn't affect you at all. And then the other thing is just stay on top of it and keep checking all of your websites and reach out to your faculty and see if they've heard of anything else that's coming up, because there will constantly be throughout the cycle new jobs coming up. So if you are tied to a specific location, I think staying on top of it and constantly looking at what's posted is going to be.
No, I agree with Sean. I mean, that was exactly my situation too, right? Like I knew I wanted to do EP in LA. And what you hear is that there's like one job every 7 years in EP in LA, right? And they tell you, if that's what you want to do, then if you have that very strict geographical restriction, then, think twice about doing EP. I had very strict geographical restrictions. I loved EP, so I just went for it. And you know, like Sean said, I tried to stay on top of it, and some of it is idiosyncratic. It's almost like in an academic department, who retires that year, what jobs happen to come up that year. So, you know, talking to my contacts for general fellowship, talking to my contacts for EP fellowship, and then an EP, talking to the reps because they know all of this before anyone else does. And then, you know, when my job came up, it was like super exciting because, you know, it's exactly the kind of job that doesn't come up very often. So, you know, stay on top of it and then get lucky.
You'd mentioned it was like a recurring wheel. So does that mean like if you don't find a job, if you're a little flexible with timeline, you don't find a job right away in a particular area, would you recommend to continue, keep looking, don't give up, and just stay dedicated? If that's, you know, if you've got family constraints that keep you in an area, just keep looking, keep putting your name out there. And you know, would you suggest taking a job that's not exactly what you're looking for until you find something that fits what you need? Is that good advice?
I don't know if I could formally recommend that. But I think at that point, if you're really not finding anything, I think one of the questions is, one, am I being too narrow in what I'm looking for? And then that again comes out to, do I need to expand my search? Do I have to include more academic groups or more academic places, more outpatient clinics, or more groups where I'm going to be doing more outpatient? Do I need to expand kind of my parameters? Am I being too narrow in what I'm looking for? As soon as you graduate, you're going to have boards coming up, and depending on when you take your subspecialty boards, those are all going to be coming up as well. So you'll have other things to do. But you know, I don't know if I could say either take a placeholder job while you wait for the perfect job, because I don't know if that'll ever exist. I also don't know if I could really recommend, you know, just don't do anything because the perfect job will eventually come. Because I don't think that is true either. I think no matter where you end up will, and you know, you'll make it work. And if it doesn't, then it's not the right job, and you'll find, all it does is inform you, you know, what you are looking for.
Thank
Something
you.
else to note about that is I definitely stressed a lot about my decision, and I was reminded by a lot of our, you know, attendings that it is really common that your first job is usually not your permanent job, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I mean, a lot of private practice groups, like we meet doctors from other practices, and you know, one of the hospitals I go to, I've met, you know, a couple of people and listened to their stories, you know, who have been in practice for 10, 20 years. And even a physician who used to be with my group really loved the group, but the work-life balance was not for him, and he transitioned, and it was, you know, no ill will, and my group and him are still very, you know, collegial with one another. So it doesn't have to be, you know, if you really want to choose one that feels right, I would say, but you know, I wouldn't stress so much about the decision. Just, I would probably choose the one that feels right for you. And, you know, if it turns out that it wasn't right and you gave it your best shot, it's okay to move on from there. But I would say, you know, it depends on, I guess, your savings account. It's probably not best to just sit on things and not take any job. A lot of us have a lot of loans, and you know, these jobs do come and go, and it is hard to be a cardiologist in California. But I think the truth is that, like any of these decisions, no one really knows what's right, but usually, you know, you find a way to make it work and to make it work out. So I would say just choose the one that's offered to you that kind of feels the best, and it's always okay to go somewhere else, even after just a year. It's not a bad thing if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, I think that's the most important advice. No job is going to be perfect. So like Sean was saying, you have to maybe expand your parameters for what you're willing to do or take, but you should find a job in this year and just do it. Because the first year is going to be, it's going to be what it is. And then at that point, if you don't like it, you can change. That you're not tied to that job by any means. But getting a job and finding the one that feels best to you or fits most of your criteria will be just fine.
Thank you. And then a question about scope of practice. Is there anything that you all discovered along the job search that you wish you knew. As an early third year, for instance, you have to be a certain COCATS level at a certain type of institution, or, I wish maybe I got certified in CT or NUC because those are highly coveted during the job search. I imagine there might be some regional variation to what's desired, but any thoughts just in terms of scope of practice that you think will be helpful for us to know?
When you're interviewing, I would say definitely ask what they require to do certain things. I wouldn't say this is the best thing, but certain groups don't actually require you to be nuclear boarded to read nuclears. I think you should get nuclear boarded if you're going to read nuclears. I think you should go through the adequate training, but I would just be very open about your questions. If they're not open back to you about what they allow you to do, or, if they seem like they're hiding something, that's never good. But usually they'll just say oh, I think as Christina mentioned earlier, radiology does this and cardiology does this. If I want to start a CT program read by cardiologists, is that an option? Has that ever been brought up before? But, what do you even require from me to do things in this practice? Because, again, I joined in my first job, and it's a very good group, but you hear rumblings about other groups where they say, oh, actually you can't read echoes until you've done this or that. So I would just make sure that they're very upfront with what are their expectations upon graduation, what is going to be offered to you immediately. Am I going to be able to read nukes, echoes, CTs, MRIs, whatever you want to do? Just make sure that you ask and that they give you clear expectations of what they want from you when you graduate. But usually the hospital privileges are obviously different than your group. Your group might say, sure, you can do whatever you want, but hospitals, I had to go back to my program director even and have him sign off that I've done X amount of pacemakers, X amount of echoes and caths. So you definitely want to have your procedure logs saved somewhere, so that when these hospitals ask for that, you can just send that to your program director, have them sign the paper. You don't want to be scrambling, because the privileges are annoying enough as is, and you don't want to go in your first day and not be privileged to do a cath and then have a patient with a, NSTEMI who's waiting for you to cath them, and you're not allowed to. So just ask when you interview at the groups is what I'd say.
Thank you so much. I know we're nearing the top of the hour. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to put it in the chat. And if our panelists have any last advice that they'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear it now. And there's a question. So now, with the perspective that you all have from actually starting these jobs, are there things that you thought were important when you were on the job search but didn't turn out to be that important to you? And the converse, are there things that are more important than you thought they'd be?
I think for me, numbers. I think it was really hard to compare job to job to job without having something tangible, and an easy thing to do for that would just be looking at your salary or what your partner track is, what your RVU bonus would be, and comparing jobs that way. And I think honestly, also first year attending with no understanding of our tax system and how everything works, essentially we're all making the same amount at this point. It's all it all 50% of it's pretty much gone, and pretty much it's a very close to a level playing field, I'd say, to some degree. So I think don't focus so much on the numbers, and kind of like what somebody said earlier, trust your gut. I think for me a big thing was understanding your what you want, what you're looking for in a group. And also for me, I think the social aspect of it, is it somewhere where you're going to be happy? Because at this point, resumes don't matter. You're all cardiologists, you all trained at great programs, you're all very accomplished. And this process isn't easy. I think the most important thing is just are you going to be happy there doing what you're doing, and are you going to be happy doing it alongside the people you'll be alongside? That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'd agree with Sean. I think that the second part of that question is really important. What are the things that are more important than you expected them to be? And for me, it's like the people that you work with are the people you spend a lot of time with. And just like fellowship, if you enjoy being at work with your fellows, you will enjoy fellowship. And if you don't, you're not going to like it very much. So So from my perspective, just finding a group of people that you think you would gel well with is actually, I think, even more important than like minor changes in salary between jobs.
Something else I'd say that I didn't realize, which, again, I agree not to focus on the numbers for sure, especially early on. But something that's been mentioned to be by my group that is not common amongst, especially private practice groups, is like transparency in the numbers. Again, it shouldn't be your main focus, but my group is very, very transparent. I have access if I want to see the numbers billed by each physician and what we've brought in. You know, they're very transparent about what they make, what we make. It's the model of how you make what, and even the partnership meetings, even before partner, we're included in most all of the partnership meetings. There's a very small subset of the meeting that only the partners are involved in. Whereas I think in some private practice groups, you know, some of the juniors don't know what their seniors make. They don't know what the numbers are. They don't know how they determine what the salaries are. So again, it's a little bit more of the just kind of feeling out when you interview with these groups. How open are they? How transparent are they? But I think it's easy to get taken advantage of in the private practice world, depending on maybe where you come from. Unfortunately, sometimes like your sex can, you know, matter too. I've had a few interviews with weird questions asked to me by men in their like 50s, 60s, 70s. It's just can be a little bit odd. So sort of feeling that out for yourself, but then just also asking like, how do the partnership meetings work? How does the numbers work? Do I have access to these types of things? Because I've learned that it really, there's no reason they shouldn't be showing this to you. Our group works great, even though I know the wide differential that I make versus my 10th year partners. There's no animosity there. So there really is no reason that those things shouldn't be shown to you early on.
I remember some advice that I got at this meeting when I was a fellow that I thought was really cool was Chris Pan, if any of the UCI fellows remember him, said, you know, you can think about three things. You can think about location, you can think about the content of the work, and you can think about finances, right? And we'd all love to have a job that was perfect, you know, along all three of those dimensions, but no one job is going to be perfect along all three of those dimensions. So be very honest with yourself about, you know, how you value each of those three, and, you know, then think about how each job aligns with your priorities in each category, and that can provide some clarity as to what kind of job you're looking for and what kind of job you want to take. I mean, for me, being in LA, you know, doing EP and having wonderful mentors were my priorities. And once I figured that out, it really clarified what I was looking for and helped me decide which job to choose. So, useful way of thinking about it.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I think that brings us to the end of the hour. We've had so much great advice from all of you. Nari, if you have anything else you want to add, or Allison or Paul, I'll give everyone a second here, but otherwise I think we're pretty much at the end of our time.
Yeah, I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but, you know, a big thank you to all of our panelists. The information and the advice that you shared with us is really something we can't get from anywhere else. So I know it's been immensely helpful for me personally, and I'm sure for all of the fellows that joined in. So thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Until next year. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dr. Sean.
Okay, so you say thanks, Dr. Sean.
Yeah. So